I want to welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started so that we're not too late starting our Planning Commission meeting. Thank you all for being here.
I'll sit in the front row. Somebody's got to sit in the front row, right?
It's easier to get up here then. Welcome, everyone. My name is Erin Wardell. I'm the Planning and Development Services Manager here at Washington County. And this is a really special event. This is our first in-person opportunity to see our planning commissioners since COVID. And so it's just really wonderful to be in the same room as all of you. We've appreciated working with you over the past couple of years virtually and appreciate all of your time and commitment, but it's really special to be able to see you in person. For this great event tonight, to acknowledge Jeff Petrillo and Matt Wellner for their 10 years of service on our Planning Commission. Normally, planning commissioners can serve 2 4-year terms, but these two were so great, we kept them for an extra 2 years. And we wish we could keep them longer, but we can't. So I wanted to say a few words and then invite others up here to say a few words as well. When we're done with that, we will hand you some lovely plaques that we have. So in preparation for this evening, I did a little bit of research on the origin of planning commissions in the state of Oregon. When I think of planning in Oregon, I think of Senate Bill 100, which this year is celebrating its 50th year. But the origin of planning commissions in Oregon actually goes back to 1919, when the state gave the authority for cities to think about how they plan and grow in a more orderly fashion. It wasn't until right after World War II that counties were also given the ability to form planning commissions. And that was mostly due, I think, to a lot of things that were happening in Washington County at the time, because we experienced a significant amount of our growth post-World War II. There's a whole other history of that we can talk about some other time. So in researching this, I looked up the Department of Land Conservation and Development Planning Commissioner training packet, and it was really interesting, actually. I gleaned a lot of great information from there, but the piece I wanted to read tonight is the roles and responsibilities of a planning commissioner. So the first, understand land use planning. Know that planning is evolving and ongoing. Know about the statewide land use program and local land use history. Be aware of interrelationships of planning to community goals, priorities, and budget constraints. Reflect the values of the community. As a volunteer who is obviously committed to your community, you can see or sense what is needed. Use your unique position, separate from the elected political leaders, to articulate local values. Educate the public on land use. Planning Commission meetings often are community members' first contact with local government and with land use. Act in ways that increase understanding and respect for the responsiveness of government. Understand opportunities and limits of PC authority. Recognize that you can be proactive, the initiator of new or changed policies, and that there are limits to what you can do. Be clear about when your role is advisory and when it is that of the final decision maker. Understand the legislative and quasi-judicial processes. Interpret and apply zoning provisions. Apply facts to criteria. Your planning staff and legal counsel and the information in this manual and lots of other information out there will help you with that. And then finally, and I think this is the most important, make decisions and recommendations. Be courageous and don't avoid hard decisions. And I can't think of two people who've done these things better in the years that I've been involved with the Planning Commission than Jeff and Matt. Both of you have truly been outstanding voices for the community. We appreciate your dedication. You both came prepared to every meeting. You asked staff the hard questions, even when we didn't want them, but you needed to be there in that role to do that for us. And I think it resulted in really good planning. So thank you so much for what you've done. And I want to invite Chair Lockwood up to say some words next.
That was a pretty overwhelming description of a planning commissioner. Well, I will briefly say, I've served with Matt and Jeff for 6 years on the Planning Commission. And while I'm very excited to meet our incoming members, Mike Fry is here and Joe Kaiser, with Matt and Jeff, we are losing 2 gems. Jeff I think is especially known for his philosophical perspective and focus on, you mentioned community values, livability, and public engagement. And often Matt brings a practical perspective with his deep knowledge of land development and construction. So they've both been great colleagues and mentors to me. Thank you both so much. I think you'll both be pretty busy with other things now that you're not on the Planning Commission, but I hope that if issues come up where you have a perspective that you'd like to share with us, that I hope you'll do that. So thank you both.
Now we have 4 of our county commissioners in the room, and so I wanted to see if any of you would like to say a few words. And we have Commissioner Rogers on Zoom as well, if you would like to say a few words too. There he is.
Roy, would you like to go first?
I'd be happy to. Thank you. I didn't realize there'd be 4 there, and I'm pleased that they are. Both of the individuals we're talking about, Jeff and Matt, have done a terrific job. And I think I'm probably the only one in the room that probably outdates you, but in terms of your contributions and leadership to the county, it's been outstanding. My colleagues there will, I'm sure, echo the same sentiments. It's a pretty thankless job. You read volumes and volumes of materials. You are there to represent independently thoughts, and you've done that admirably. You've had occasions, I know, where the county commission didn't exactly agree, but good-hearted people with, are going to disagree from time to time. And you've been real gems at understanding how differences arise, and you've come out with better products. And so I'm going to miss you both. I think you brought perspective that is going to be sorely missed. So I couldn't come out tonight, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to thank you in person for countless times we've talked. Jeff, you and I have talked before, and on the phone, and Matt, you and I have talked many, many times about different issues that you've encountered or seen over the years. So thank you for the friendship you've brought to the Washington County family and the good work that you've done. So I applaud you, and I know you'll be busy, and I hope that your colleagues on the commission there will reach out to you from time to time to get some of that historical wisdom that you still have. So thank you, Aaron.
Well, good evening, everyone. I think you all know me, but I'm Catherine Harrington, the commission chair. And I really appreciate Commissioner Rogers going first with his remarks, because he is our longest tenured commissioner and has served as commissioner with many, many different planning commissioners over the course of his decades of service. And we on the commission get to hear one another's thoughts about different proposals, both in work session as well as in board meetings. And I am very honored to work with my 4 colleagues on the commission. I first met Jeff and Matt when I was a Metro counselor, and I had more interactions with Jeff through CPO7, but with Matt through the land use type of policy setting at Washington County. But my husband also served on the Washington County Planning Commission. So I got to learn more about Washington County's community development code and go on site tours and hear different stories. So I have nothing but great respect for the work that planning commissions do, for the proposals that our staff form up that you would weigh in on, provide great advisement for, and help us get to the point where we can feel comfortable that options have been explored, thoughts, input from community members have been taken in all those countless hours where you've listened to people state their case and share their perspectives. Thank you for that enduring patience and consideration. You're just angels in my book. So, Jeff, Matt and I had the opportunity of a informal conversation in the lobby a couple of months ago, and I was like, geez, I don't know what I'm going to do. You two have always been on the planning commission for me. And, I've just been able to trust that the full planning commission has been able to deliberate. Hello, Blake. Thanks for joining us. And so I was rest assured that there were good applicants coming in, and my colleagues and I just recently appointed your two newest members, and we hope that part of this is making you feel welcome and interested in the work that you'll be doing. So thank you again for your 10 years of service. You've definitely made our community a better place, not only in your contributions in your work outside of county work, but definitely in the planning commission. So thank you. I hope I haven't blabbed on too much, but I invite my colleagues to come and share their thoughts too. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. As the chair said, I'm Pam Trace. I'm Commissioner for District 2. I appreciate all of the work that the Planning Commission does, but I've had the opportunity actually to know Matt through my work at Westside Economic Alliance. So, I had that opportunity early on, and I appreciated the wisdom that you provided during those times as well. But thank you so much for your 10 years of service here. It's greatly appreciated. And I got to know Jeff shortly after I was elected, because I think you were up for reappointment as well. And we met at Jim and Patty's coffee shop in Forest Heights, had a great conversation. And it was really clear to me immediately that I was talking with someone that was such a great depth of knowledge that reappointment was like, oh, please, will you do this again? So we had a great time. And over the course of my term here, I've actually gotten to know Jeff better and better, and in a personal sense as well. So I really appreciate the fact that you've put the 10 years in here too. I know that much of your heart is in Eastern Oregon and Joseph, and I hope you'll remain here with us mere mortals during the rest of the time. So thank you again, and my best wishes to you. And I really look forward to getting to know our newest member. So it's Mike, right? And it's pronounced Fry. Okay, there's my first learning experience. So thank you, and best wishes to Matt and to Jeff. Thank you.
I don't have nearly as many words as Commissioner Treese, but that's normal.
Not nearly as many smart.
Anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate certainly the work that all of you have done for all those years. I am on record saying many times that there is no way that I would ever be on the Planning Commission because it's too doggone much work. I'm not a big reader, and so that's what you have to do, is read voluminous packets of information. So for the 10 years that you've been doing that and the bazillion pages that you've done, thank you very much. My son-in-law is actually didn't heed my advice. He is vice chair of the Planning Commission in Sherwood. And so that's the course he has taken. And certainly I appreciate all of the things that he does for the city of Sherwood. But we just want to say thank you, just like the chair and Pam has said, like Nafisa is going to follow me up and clean up. Thank you. We can't say thank you enough for our volunteers and certainly the people that serve the county for free as volunteers and provide us with their experience and certainly their expertise, their willingness to listen. So thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I think I should probably introduce myself. I don't know if many of you know. My name is Nafisa Fai. I'm one of the commissioners here, and I was elected in 2020 and was sworn in 2021. So I haven't had the opportunity to come in-person meetings with you all. So many of you I'm meeting for the first time and look forward to working with you. And I'm so glad we're past the pandemic and that we're in person, and look forward to more meetings with you all. And I am a firm believer of volunteering. Quick story about me. Well, I come from Somalia. I lived in refugee camps, and one of my dreams were to work for the two organizations that were helping us. That was the UN and the American Red Cross. So when I came to America and got my education, I don't know how I got that philosophy of that. You have to get your education, then go to work. But that's how it happened. One of the first thing I did was look up, after I was done with my schooling, the two organizations that were helping, because that was my dream. And I couldn't find UN, and I couldn't convince my African mom that San Francisco is another American city. She was like, nope, we just got to America and you're staying here. So the next best thing I found was the American Red Cross. It was actually 2 blocks up north of the low income housing that we were living. And the first thing I did was walk into that building, and I didn't look for a job. I wanted to volunteer. And that's exactly what I did. I volunteered. And many months later, the manager that was running one of the lab reached out and said, you should apply a position. And I ended up working there for decades. So I believe in volunteer, and without volunteers, a lot of work couldn't have been done. I think America runs on volunteers, and that's exactly what you do. I just wanted to stop by here. I know we're meeting for the first time. It's like, hello and bye, Jeff, but I appreciate your service and I believe in what you do. And thank you for all the contributions that you've made to Washington County. We now have myself as one of the elected peoples, and Jeff, and that's for you, Jeff. But Matt and I have a little history. Matt and I volunteered together for the Clean Water Services Advisory Commission. So we served on that commission and worked together. And I was always really impressed with you. I think what you said about doing their homework, I can attest that. Matt always came prepared. And I always used to be like, how is he able to cheat this meeting? How is he getting all these questions and answers and these feedback? So I know you weren't cheating because you didn't have any equipment and you weren't looking at any notes. So you have a brilliant mind. And I'm so glad that you shared with Washington County and that you contribute. And I look forward to working with you. And you'll be hearing from me, as you have been, even the short time I've been elected. I was able to make calls and you were able to take my calls. So I really appreciate. So thank you, all of you, what you do. And I think too, from District 1, I was able to appoint or participate in that process. So Rachel, you're here. Nice to see you. And thank you for your contributions. And let's have a cake, right? Yeah.
I think we're all excited about the cake part of this. I do want to manage expectations for our new planning commissioner in the room. We don't always have cake, but maybe we could have it more often. It's fun for people. So no further ado, I'm gonna make sure we hand out our plaques. So first I have Jeff's plaque. Jeff, your commitment to the Planning Commission is outstanding. I think that we're gonna need your cell phone number in case we have any questions about Robert's Rules of Order at upcoming meetings. And Matt, I don't think anybody knows the Community Development Code like you do, including staff like me. So thank you so much. We will miss you. Also may call your cell phone. Thank you all. We do have our meeting starting at about 6:30, which it is in 2 minutes, but I want to make sure people have time for refreshments.
Karen, do you want to give both Jeff and Matt a chance to?
Oh, that's true. They could say something to all of us as well if they'd like to. Or Blake? Blake, do you want to come up and say something too? Yeah. We can open it up.
Thank you. Just very quickly, no, we have actual planning business to do, but I want to thank both of you for bringing so much clarity and understanding to a new commissioner. I was brought on to the commission during the pandemic and came in from ERMDAC and needed to get my footing and understand the processes. And I could always look to you to really provide a lot more context to what I was reading and to really understand, well, what are we voting for? And what does all this mean? And you never shied away from taking a question that probably, might seem silly to someone who's done this for so long as you have, but you always made me feel like you were an open book and someone who I could come to for understanding. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to recognize the loss of so much time that we have, that you've given us to the Planning Commission. Is going to be really hard to replace so much of that. But, we have those of us who are serving now, and, hopefully we'll have the same longevity, and we'll be able to hear people talk about us in this way and at the end of our tenure. So thank you for providing the path forward.
I don't like to surprise people with speeches if they don't want to give one, but you are welcome to come up and say something if you'd like to.
I never had a chance. It's funny, Aaron. I also looked up about Planning Commission, and there was a closing paragraph in this book about it, and it's not much written about planning commissions, but it says a special note: planning commissioners do not get paid. Let's see if I can read this properly. They don't get paid. Their compensation is typically limited to 15 to 20 cents per mile for travel. Of course, who knows when this was written, for the meetings, and on occasions, a mediocre dinner. I don't think, although we do have cake tonight. I think some of this is tongue in cheek, but a commissioner must endure long meetings, boring staff reports, stressful decisions. Anyone who does so can truly be said to have a strong sense of civic responsibility. It is an honor, and I appreciate the politicians who appointed myself and provide the opportunity, because I do view it as an honor and a privilege. And I got to say that almost every single one of you in this room, you're a colleague and have been a colleague for that long. Not always in agreement, but I appreciate all of you. I'm going to miss working with you. I respect the work the staff does. You've honored our roles and respected our roles. And I don't think there's I can't remember a time when you've told us no. If we've requested something or wanted to do something, even if we ended up to be a rubber stamp planning commission, you really never let us go into that role. You let us take the lead. We wanted to do something, you let us do it. You needed help with something, we did it. We did some momentous things. Middle housing, steep slopes, what do you want to think about that? But I mean, there were so many things, and I think they were important, and I really appreciate the opportunity to work with my colleague, Matt. And so thank you for this, and thank you for expressing this gratitude. It's meaningful to both of us, I'm sure.
This is a little overwhelming. These aren't usually this big. So thank you very much. And thanks for all of you for showing up. I really, okay. Well, that's Erin right there. She nailed that. I really wanted to talk about Jeff a little bit and just tell you how good he was. A really, really good planning commissioner, and he was the most prepared of all of us, always. He always asked questions. The most important thing was that he always made sure that you understood why he made the decision that he made and the recommendation. And for the planning commissioners that are here, the board relies on our recommendation, but they like to hear how we get there. And he really did a good job of making sure that we understood the steps that he took to get there. And I'm happy that we've been able to do this together for 10 years. I'm happy to call you a friend, and I hope that we can continue to be land use wonks a little bit after this. So thank you very much.
I hope you like chocolate cake, or at least chocolate frosting. Oh, chocolate frosting and white chocolate.
Thank you all. Let's have some refreshments and then head over to the meeting. Thanks.
Did you want to figure out? Okay.
How do you want it staged?
We will. We got a little bit of better clout. They're getting some houses up.
Good evening. So Commissioners Podar and Miller, if you could accept the invitation to be promoted to panelists, we're working on getting you guys up and set up.
Hi, this is Sushmita Podar. Would I please join the panel? Thank you.
Thank you, and you guys should be able to turn on your cameras now if you so choose, and I think we're getting close to being ready.
Hello, can anyone on the video hear me?
I can hear you. This is Michelle.
Oh,
I can hear you.
Great. And oh, she hasn't been promoted yet.
I see Michelle. I'm speaking after Erin, so I'm a presenter. So I'll wait to put my camera on until after Erin's finished, I guess. But I think I'm promoted.
Yes, we were looking for one more commissioner.
Okay.
Michelle, no interrupting.
I know,
It's so great to see you in
Good to
person.
see you in person
Kidding.
too. I got my chair.
Yeah, and your name.
Hello, Stacy, and hello, Sushmita.
Going on LinkedIn later.
Nice that you guys can join, Sushmita.
No, he got one, yeah.
He can hear. What
Going on
time is
LinkedIn.
it over there?
I was thinking I should get a picture.
When you want to speak, you push this, but if you're not. Push your button.
Okay.
2023. And this evening's meeting of the Planning Commission is called to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Present.
Present. Jeff Petrillo,
Present.
Vice Chair Dye,
Present.
and Chair Lockwood,
Present.
Commissioner Podar,
Present, and I use she, her pronouns.
Commissioner Milliman,
Present.
and I think we have 7 present
All right.
planning
Thank you.
commissioners.
Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Wood here.
May we have the director's report, please? So you're quite soft.
Oh, I'm not on. Now I'm on. Is that better?
Yes.
Erin Wardell, Planning and Development Services Manager. We're really excited to host a hybrid meeting tonight as we work through any technology differences. We're just going to figure out how this goes. It's really wonderful to see some of us in person and also have our members able to participate online. It was really nice to have our recognition event just prior to this to recognize Commissioners Petrillo and Wellner for their 10 years of service. We're also pleased to welcome our new planning commissioners who were appointed by the Board of Commissioners yesterday. We have Mike Fry here in the room watching, and we have Joe Kaiser online, and so he'll be participating, or watching rather, from the Zoom room. Mike is a developer. He works for Noise Development. He has about 17 years of experience building homes in Washington County. This will be a really valuable experience to bring to our Planning Commission. And Joe Kaiser is a founder of a local homeowners association management company. He also recently served on the Hillsborough City Council. So we're bringing in really valuable experience to our Planning Commission. We're very happy to have them on board. Both of these new appointees will begin their 4-year terms on February 1st. The next item is that Washington County has been, over the last couple of years, conducting an assessment of the fees that we charge for building and current planning. You may have heard this as we've been taking it through our Board of Commissioners, as we've wrapped up the assessment and are moving into next steps with updating our fee schedule as a part of our board budget update process. Tomorrow, we'll be having a meeting with local developers. We call it our development forum. We do it usually twice a year, so we invited those participants to join us, and we will be previewing some of our findings from that work and asking them for their input. So we are looking at a pretty significant increase to our fees to cover staff time for current planning and building. This is important because it's something you may be hearing about from our development community, and so I encourage you to reach out if you have questions or if you're getting any questions about it. And you can choose to join us tomorrow as well if you would like to participate in the listening session that we have scheduled. And on that note, I do want to mention that we have some job openings at the county and our building inspection team. So if you know anyone who's interested in being a building inspector, this is a really exciting opportunity. We have senior building inspector positions posted right now. We also, in the near future, will have a principal planner position for transportation planning posted. That's my former position. So really excited about bringing some new folks on board. For our upcoming meetings, I want to cover what's going to be coming to the board first, the Board of Commissioners, at their January 24th evening meeting. They will be having their third hearing on A engrossed ordinance number 882. That is the TSP amendments relating to the extension of Tile Flat Road. They will be having hearing 1 on A engrossed ordinance number 889, which is the minor amendments to the CDC, and their first hearing on A engrossed ordinance number 890, which is the middle housing land division amendments to the CDC to implement Senate Bill 458. So it's a pretty substantial meeting, quite a few ordinances all at the same time. On February 7th, for their day meeting, they'll be having their second hearing and we think adoption of ordinance 889, that's the minor amendments, and the second hearing and likely adoption of 890, middle housing land divisions. So For your PC meeting tonight, you have 3 work session topics. For your upcoming PC meetings, we don't have any items for February 1st, which would be a day meeting, so staff do recommend canceling that meeting. On February 15th, evening meeting, you will be welcoming your 2 new PC members. We'll be having the election of the PC chair and vice chair. We'll have a discussion of future work session topics, so items that you would like us to bring forward that you're interested in hearing more from staff about. And then we'll have a work session on significant natural resource regulations and consultant work. We will also have our hearing on a plan amendment to the Cedar Hills Cedar Mill Community Plan, and you'll be having a training on quasi-judicial plan amendments at this work session today. And that's what I have for the director's report.
Commissioner Petrillo.
Yes, what is the Cedar Mill planning effort or?
It's a plan amendment.
Oh, it's a plan amendment.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Don't see any other questions. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is public communication. Has anyone signed up to speak to us tonight?
Chair Lockwood, no one has signed up. Todd, is there anyone in the virtual audience that is wanting to provide comments?
There is not.
Okay, thank you. All right, then let's move on to our work sessions, and Ms. Cherniak will introduce our first speaker, Aaron Doyle, for the 2023 legislative session update.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. Teresa Cherniak, Principal Planner with Community Planning. We asked the county's Government Relations Manager, Aaron Doyle, to give the Planning Commission a preview of the legislative session as it relates to topics of interest to the Planning Commission. Aaron is in Salem today. The legislative session did start yesterday, and she's already hard at work, so we really do appreciate her time. So with that, Aaron, go ahead.
Thank you, Teresa. Good evening, Planning Commissioners. My name is Aaron Doyle. I'm the Senior Government Relations Manager for Washington County. I have a portfolio of departments within the county that I support, which includes the Land Use and Transportation Department, as well as Housing and Economic Development as the primary portions of my portfolio. But there are currently a team of 2 of us. There used to be a team of 3 of us that represent the county to enact and support the legislative agenda that our Board of Commissioners adopts on a yearly basis. Their 2023 legislative agenda was adopted in December by the Board of Commissioners and is available on the county's website if you want to see more details about what's there, but I'll provide a broad strokes overview of that in a moment. For those of you who don't have the pleasure of having witnessed a legislative session that the state of Oregon does, they alternate between odd and even years of the length of session and the things that they have to accomplish. 2023 being an odd year means it's what we call a long session, which means that they have practically 6 months approximately 6 months to can you hear me? Sorry, my computer says I'm muted, but okay. They have 6 months to accomplish their business, but there's only one thing they are required to accomplish in any given long session, and that is to pass a biennial budget for the state. Or the state of Oregon works on a 2-year cycle for their budgets for all of the work that the state administration has to accomplish and the policy goals of the legislature. So in essence, they have until June 25th to complete their work. Otherwise, they need to extend and they have to take special votes. So really all they need to do is walk out of the session with a budget, but that's never what they limit themselves to. They also do a lot of policy work, and in a long session, they kind of have unlimited bills that they can introduce, just timeframes in which to introduce them and pass them. At my count, which was done about half an hour ago, there are 1,929 bills that have been introduced for this legislative session, and they are not done. I have not read them all because I have a limited capacity for all things. Reading 1,900 bills is well beyond my threshold. but I have taken a look at the first 1,800 to see what their subject matter is, and I haven't dug as deep as I can into all of them, but I have a general sense of what they're trying to accomplish in this legislative session. But what Washington County is trying to accomplish really fits into 5 key priorities for the county. The first is making sure that we have, at the county level, the workforce and resources to do the work that we need to do to meet community goals. There are a lot of places where we have identified a need to enhance our workforce, and that's going to take investment, and that's going to require not just investment in the county, but investment in the workforce development programs that exist, and really setting up our workforce to be able to do the work that is required of them and have meaningful long-term family wage jobs as they come out of school and into the workforce for us. This is very acute in the public health and behavioral health sectors, but it is not limited to those departments within the county. One of the things that has been mentioned in the housing and land use spaces is the need for the capacity at the local level within our planning counters and our building officials and building inspectors, which is timely given that that's what one of the areas we're hiring for is. We just really need that workforce to have the opportunity to be trained, to come and join our teams. And we also need the resources in order to make sure that we can afford to hire them all, so that we can get the work done with the capacity to meet the capacity needs that we have across the county. So those are the top 2 priorities. Is number 1, workforce and making sure we have the workforce available, and then number 2 is making sure we have the resources to pay for the things that we're required to do by the state. The state, as I mentioned, 1,900 bills. There's some work in there for counties to accomplish, and we need to make sure that that comes with the resources to get it done, so we aren't sacrificing other things that the community has placed a value on and is demanded of our Board of Commissioners to accomplish for the sake of the livability and the ability to thrive within our communities. The third thing that we're looking at very specifically is related to economic development tools that we have in the county's toolbox, particularly, and this ties back to the resource needs that we have in a program called Gain Share, which is where we receive payments from the state related to some of the property tax abatements we have given out. They take some of the income taxes that they earn off the large number of jobs that those property tax abatements account for, and give a piece of that back to the local governments who have abated their taxes. And so we're trying to extend that to make sure that the county has sufficient resources for the foreseeable future, or gets closer to having sufficient resources for the foreseeable future by offsetting those abatements. This is all going to get tied into something I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but the semiconductor work that you may have read about in the newspapers, that is a big topic in this session. The other 2 components of what Washington County has prioritized are related to some capital infrastructure needs that we have. One is the county courthouse, which was is over a century old for the original portion, and then over, I think it's hitting 50 years for the supplemental section, and still does not meet the size and capacity needs of the county, the size of Washington County, because it was built back when we were an agricultural and very small county. We have not been able to expand it. So we're asking for resources from the state, from a program that they have that will fund the planning process for us to do an analysis of what we need, find a site selection, all of those components over the next 2 years, so that we can be poised to do a capital investment, provided we can bring the resources to bear to actually replace our courthouse. The other piece is finishing up the gap financing for the Center for Addiction Triage and Treatment, also known as CAT. This is a facility that the county is putting together to deal with behavioral and addiction services within Washington County. And it is going to be a facility that meets the gamut of needs, from people who need to come in for acute counseling, or in-house programs where they can stay in the facility. So across that spectrum of need, we really need a robust facility, and that Center for Addiction and Triage and Treatment is something that the county has spent a lot and is putting a lot of resources behind. We just need to close some of that financing to make sure we can complete construction. So those are the 2 big capital projects that are part of Washington County's agenda for the session. That doesn't mean that's all we're going to work on, because there's a lot of ideas out there, and some of them just aren't ours to spearhead, but ours to support, and others are ours to fine tune and make sure actually function when it comes back to you guys to do work related to planning, for instance. And some of them are just ideas that we can't afford to take on, or actually provide a disservice to members of our community and meeting our community needs. So we run the gamut from, you know, fully spearheading ideas to fully opposing ideas in the legislative session. So writ large, I'm going to talk about kind of 4 areas that overlap, because when it comes to land use and planning, that touches everything. But one of the big areas, as I mentioned, in the land use space is going to be the work that's being done to implement or try to implement recommendations related to the semiconductor task force. The semiconductor task force was a group put together early last year by Senator Wyden, former Governor Kate Brown, and Maria Pope, the CEO of PGE. And they took a look at what it would take to enhance and support the semiconductor work that is done as a foundation of a bunch of advanced manufacturing across the state, basically trying to get Oregon poised to pull down a bunch of federal resources that are coming through what is called the CHIPS Act, which is a federal investment program in the semiconductor and chips manufacturing arena. Oregon is at the heart of a lot of the research and development capacity that happens in that semiconductor industry. And we want to be ready to pull in those federal dollars to make investments in the state of Oregon to enhance our education programs, do a lot of workforce development to get people not just into jobs, but into living wage family jobs without having to get a PhD. We're looking at a lot of components of that, but the land use component of that is kind of identifying the industrial lands that are available across the state and how to make them development ready, and to see if they're sufficient to meet the needs of what the semiconductor folks feel is going to be put us in the best light when it comes to getting federal dollars pulled down to the state of Oregon. The conversation is still really nascent in that world. I was at a hearing early. The reason why I'm still in Salem is because they have hearings until 6:30 at night because no one has anything better to do right now. And I was in the semiconductor joint committee listening in on their initial hearing. And what I heard today was that land use component and kind of the outline of what the task force thinks should be done is expected probably next week. So kind of bated breath on what that means, which may have some land use impacts in Washington County being one of like the hubs of this industry, not just with the obvious one of Intel, but there is a lot of advanced manufacturing that is part of that supply chain that does a lot of the research related to semiconductor work throughout Washington County. So, you know, being close in and having that industry tightly together, Washington County is of course being looked at. And we need to see what those recommendations are before we as a county really address those. But that is something at the end of the day, if something moves forward in Washington County, out of that task force, there will likely be work for planning and land use consideration within Washington County. In addition to that land use writ large, there's also a bunch of concepts around planning writ large. Some of that goes to concerns that the development community has raised about the speed of the process to get from I have a piece of property I'd like to develop all the way through final certificate of occupancy. And that has some impacts on how our land use and transportation department fundamentally works. And we have to make sure that it meets the needs of everyone and keeps the county financially secure, but sees, we find those windows of opportunity to really enhance and better the development process at a local level, and then make sure that we're not being inhibited at the state level from meeting those needs and protecting the county from fiscal irresponsibility. And also making sure that we have a capacity to do the work that they expect of us. The other big planning issue that is going to come up is a little bit more targeted than some of those placeholders we have related to how the development community would like to see change occur. And that's related to what is called the Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rulemaking that the Department of Land Conservation and Development did over the course of the last year, which will have profound impacts on the work that this planning commission and the county writ large does in the planning world. there have been some concerns about how those rules, the process by which the rules were enacted, but also the outcomes that may or may not occur that is expected versus what the reality will look like in the ground. And the legislature has taken notice of those concerns and also has raised their own set of concerns about the authority that the department worked under, given that there was no legislative impetus for that work. This is part of also, you may have read in the news, ongoing litigation between some local jurisdictions and the state related to the implementation of these rules. My assumption is that our Land Use and Transportation Department has provided you guys some levels of updates about what work we can foresee coming to the Planning Commission to enact those rules and make sure that we are in compliance with state land use planning. But I foresee at least a conversation, if not a change, coming out of the legislature in what DLCD has required of local governments to accomplish these things. No one disagrees with the goals. What folks have raised are concerns about the ability to actually implement and that implementation actually having the effects that they are aiming for, which is creating more access to the modes of transportation that reduce greenhouse gases, creating more centralized areas where we do more comprehensive planning that are supposed to work towards that greenhouse gas reduction, and also just system-wide transportation updates that can be quite, I'm going to use the word onerous, but really I mean in-depth and complicated. I just speak with an opinion sometimes as opposed to just a clear statement of the objective facts. So going forward through this session, we'll really be looking at what the legislature wants to change about that climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking and how we can go back to the drawing board and make sure that we're all part of the process in an effective manner. In addition, focus a little bit more on housing. The Department of Land Conservation and Development and the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department have released a report to the legislature called the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. And a major component of that document and report is recommendations back to the state legislature about changes to the housing planning process that need to be made in their estimation that help reach that what is now estimated at 170 unit shortfall that we have in the housing units needed in Oregon, never mind the growth we anticipate needing on top of that. So sometimes you hear 140, sometimes you hear 170 shortage, but it's a pretty big number. There are cities that don't even have that many, there are many cities that don't have that many units built over the course of 20 years, or even that many units in their jurisdictions, and we need to meet that across the state. So the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis provides for a bunch of proposed changes to the housing statutes for planning purposes that will have impacts on both the county and our constituent cities, as well as impacts to the metro regional government and the overall state investment in housing planning. So it's a pretty comprehensive review. So I'm going to pause just because I don't know the protocol. I see a hand is raised, so I'm happy to answer questions as I move along because I don't have anything written. So go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Podar.
Thank you. Thanks, Erin. I wanted to just clarify. I couldn't. I think I maybe missed 170 units. Could you just elaborate on that a little bit? Just to go back and say that again, because if are we just 170 units short of providing housing to people, or what is it?
I meant 170,000 units. So I don't know if that was lack of clarity or lack of sleep on my part where I dropped that 1,000. So it's 170,000 units that statewide we are short in housing. So I apologize for that confusion.
It's early morning for me as well across the continent. So I guess it got lost over the oceans, but I was like 170 units, but thank you for clarifying.
Gotten lost in my own internal translation as well. So thank you for asking that clarifying question.
So 170,000 units is what we're short of.
And that's units of all types. It's multifamily, it's single family, it's townhomes, it's duplexes, it's, executive housing. Across the board, there are shortages in every community, in every county for meeting the needed housing. And I think that that's pretty apparent. And so what the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, or sometimes you'll hear it shorthanded as ONA, which is a really fun acronym. But that needs analysis is looking at how we can incentivize, how we can provide the infrastructure for, how we can kind of delegate authorities to different levels of government for making sure that we are actually striding closer and closer, reducing that number, as opposed to constantly barely keeping up with the current level of growth and starting to backfill. And I will say that there are land use components to this. There will be probably planning implications for the county. It's that the legislative concept that has been introduced is very early review process, but it's really impactful in Washington County in the urban unincorporated areas where there are some moves to create city-like responsibilities for the county, which is going to be challenged because counties have a very particular role, and we need to look at how urban development occurs with a plan for an urban service provider to be providing the levels of service that are required to actually make livable, built communities where people can thrive in their communities and continue to be part of Washington County. So our partnership with the cities within Washington County, but also the metro regional government in this process, as well as our sister counties, is going to be part of the ongoing conversation where we're going to suss out where those impacts to county work and planning commission work will also be. And then the final big picture hot topic that everyone loves and adores is there's a bridge that needs replacement and we have to pay for it. And that bridge crosses from one state to another. So nothing is simple about it. And that is a major component of the transportation work that is going to be done in the legislature this year. And in addition to that, and as part of that, is the conversation around tolling will continue. So those are some big implications for, parts of Washington County where diversion and planning for it need to occur, creating alternatives to driving on the infrastructure that's going to be tolled are, but also the flow back, which is, I just maybe made that word up, but basically the impacts of delays when it comes to an interstate bridge backing up that then backs up all the way into Washington County because everything is connected in this region through our transportation infrastructure. So there was a lot of various topics. I am happy to answer questions, and I constantly keep my land use and transportation department in the loop about as much as I know, as often as I can, so they can then help you guys keep informed about what's happening at the legislature. But I'm happy to take any further questions or leave you to stew on all of the concepts that are out there, and then say that legislature is a little bit crazy.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Doyle? Commissioner Petrello?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Ms. Doyle, housing has been obviously with the election season behind us, I mean, everyone was talking about it. It's a problem across the state, across the country. Relative to any bills, are there bills dealing with the terms and conditions, I guess, or fine tuning of middle housing? That's one question. And two is, are there any bills that you're aware of, since you hear rumors of what people might introduce, and then what the rumors are and what the reality is often everyone sort of waits to see. And you're probably one of the few people who has seen some of these. Is there anything related to manufactured housing that has been introduced?
As to the first question related to middle housing, I haven't seen anything specific, but I haven't finished reading the bill for implementation of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis to see if they're making any structural changes to House Bill 2001's requirements. So at this point, I don't know that there's anything in there related to making adjustments there. I think so many cities and counties have just gotten through the process of adopting their required changes to their comprehensive plans that it's never too late to see something. As to manufactured housing, there are a couple of bills that are relating to manufactured housing, but they're still placeholders, is what we call it. So the way the Oregon legislature works is every bill has what's called a relating to clause, which limits the scope of the policy changes that can be placed into a piece of legislation. So they can be very specific or they can be very broad. And what I have seen more of in this session than any other session I have worked in the past 10 years is relating to clauses that are pretty big and just the state shall study, which is never the final policy that they plan to enact. Occasionally they do a study, but very rarely. So I've only seen a couple of bills that are related to manufactured housing. Some of that is studying ownership opportunity, and some of it is related to the building codes around it, but I don't know at the end of the day what they're actually hoping to achieve around manufactured housing. So it's a loose answer, but I'm a lobbyist. It's what I do.
Thank you.
Commissioner Porter.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. Erin, I don't know whether it's the legislative session has just started. And so of course, there's everything that is so unknown right now. The words and thoughts and ideas are going to flow through the rest of the year. But I have some thoughts, concerns, and questions. And I don't know if it's relevant, but is Washington County, and this is a question, is Washington County going to take an active approach in ensuring that our legislators, they talk about the reality of what is happening in Washington County when it comes to housing? We are seeing, we're going to start seeing climate refugees, domestic climate refugees moving from all across the country. We are already seeing that. And over this year, we are going to see more. And over the next 5 years, we are going to see even more. I know that Governor Kotek said that housing is going to be addressed immediately, but of course we know what immediately means. It's with 170,000 units. But are we really going to be visionary about talking about who's investing in housing? As we mentioned that in 2020, about $287 million worth of housing property was bought up by Wall Street investors. So who gets to buy housing in our county? Is it possible for county to ask for rules or laws, policies to ensure that people, first-time home buyers, first-time people who are moving in, people who are living in that home, in middle housing and all, they are the ones buying units. Are we going to take a visionary approach in ensuring that barriers to being able to rent or to buy, the 3 times income and all of those little issues, which is a big thing for people, are being addressed? Because it is how people connect to the land is how whether they're able to live there safely. We are also seeing massive gentrification of our county. People near transit line, the building that's happening near transit line, most of them are very privileged apartments with extremely expensive rent. So the people living near to transit lines are being forced to move to the outskirts of the county where there is no public transportation. So now, since I sit on the transportation committees, 9 of them, nobody's talking about the fact that we don't have enough transportation in Washington County at all. So I'm wondering, is Washington County taking a visionary approach in being proactive about asking these questions? Or can we do that? Is there a possibility of being able to do that so we can ensure that land use is not just for the privileged, not just for companies, but it is really for the people, and that we can create some sort of a safe cultural space for people to live and thrive?
Thank you for that extensive question, and I'm going to answer it in a brief way, which does a bit of a disservice to the question. But foundationally, we don't just work on priorities, we also work off of board principles, and the board has adopted a series of principles when it comes to the housing space, which includes not just the affordable housing that our housing authority tries to accomplish, which we have a lot of concepts that we're actively engaging around and are an active voice in the community for making sure that we have the tools necessary to build that type of housing at those affordable rent prices or home ownership prices. All of the components that our housing authority does. But there's also work that is called for in our principles related to home buying and making sure that it is possible for people to enter the market. So some of that feeds into our federal work, because talking about investment buyers, all of that is much more regulated at the federal level. There are probably some concepts related to that at the state level, but I know that Senator Wyden has taken that cause up as well. So we'll be looking at how those, how our voice can be played into that conversation through the direction of our commissioners. It's also, I think, really important to know that there are plenty of conversations going on around how transit service in Washington County has an impact on where we should be placing people, where housing should be developed, and that when we make changes to the transit system, that has an impact on how we've planned for housing, but we plan for housing around transportation-oriented development. I think when we talk about that as a county, and when I'm in offices speaking with legislators, one of the reasons why I talk about the Southwest Corridor light rail extension is because the extensive housing work that we've done in that corridor to really make sure that we can't stop gentrification. That's a really unfortunate reality, but we can mitigate against it by setting ourselves up to have planned for and keep housing that is affordable in those transit corridors as we develop the corridor and then develop the transit as well. So that is one thing that we definitely pulled out as part of the mission and work that Washington County continues to do, and making sure that rules or regulations around that have that concept in mind. We do talk about how Washington County is trying to grow to meet that population demand, and that we, I have to say, in the metro region, have been one of the most prolific developers of housing of the three counties because of the nature of where Washington County has made investments, where the cities within Washington County have become partners in that conversation. So we're not shying away from what it takes to do things right in Washington County and mitigate the potential impacts, but also make sure that the transportation and transit comes with it, and that those dollars should coexist as part of the legislative principles that our commission has adopted.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? I guess I have a question about, you were talking about rulemaking on climate-friendly and equity communities, and I wasn't quite certain whether, you said it is likely to come before the Planning Commission, is that right?
I'm gonna turn a little bit to the other Erin in the room, but there are planning changes or comprehensive planning changes that have to be made, and that obviously is the starting point for that is staff, and then comes to the Planning Commission. Erin, please correct all of the things that I said wrong.
There are some very specific requirements for local government planning included in the climate-friendly and equitable communities rules. And so the Planning Commission will be having a work session probably on February 15th about what we think those look like. As of January 1st, we could no longer require minimum parking within a certain proximity to high-frequency transit or MAX stations. And so we've implemented that through staff guidance, since we couldn't do an ordinance amending our CDC quickly enough. As of July 1st, either we'll be required to implement a parking pricing program, or we will be no longer able to enforce minimum parking anywhere in unincorporated Washington County. So the Planning Commission will have some significant work to do on our Community Development Code in order to implement those rules.
Thank you. Thank you both. Our other Erin is, yes, there you are. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, and I wish you the best of luck with the rest of your meeting tonight.
Thanks a lot. All right, our next item is an update on significant natural resources regulations.
Great, and Michelle Miller will give this presentation.
Good evening, Chair Lockwood and Commissioners. I'm Michelle Miller, Senior Planner in Community Planning with Land Use and Transportation. Tonight's presentation is an update on the Land Use Board of Appeals remand of the county's significant natural resource regulations and related guidelines. But first, I'm a little bit sorry that I couldn't be there in person tonight, but the flu bug is running through my house, and I don't want anyone there exposed to it. And I also want to take a moment and express my gratitude to Commissioners Petrillo and Wellner for your years of service and commitment to the Planning Commission and Washington County. Your questions and comments and perspective, both your real life experiences and history on the Planning Commission, have been such a vital contribution to the ordinances and issues that I've brought before you. And I know you've helped me make them a better end product as a result. So thank you. You will be missed. Next slide, please. So tonight, I will very briefly give a recap of A engrossed ordinance number 869, significant natural resources, and the work we're presently doing to address the remand. I will discuss the status of recent legal challenges we have in front of us with a pending enforcement order hearing next month. And then I'll go over the Luba decision in Leahy Estates, a subdivision approval with on-site natural resources. Next slide. This slide highlights some of the past legal challenges to the county's Goal 5 program and natural resource standards, and the reason why we are working toward making additional changes. The county's natural resource standards and Goal 5 program, for the most part, have been in place for over 40 years. In 2017, the Oregon legislature made changes to address the housing crisis with SB 1051 by expanding the clear and objective requirements for local jurisdictions. The county's S&R standards, significant natural resource standards, included subjective terms. And when one of the county's land use decisions was appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, LUBA decided that the county could not make developers follow our original natural resource standards because they weren't clear and objective. Since some of those standards were unenforceable, a resident petitioned the Land Conservation and Development Commission, LCDC, for an enforcement order against the county, wanting the county to make our standards clear and objective and compliant with Goal 5. And until that was accomplished, no new development could be submitted to the county that may impact wildlife habitat, one of the county's significant natural resource categories. LCDC agreed with the petitioner and issued an enforcement order along with a stay on development applications. This enforcement order was lifted when the county made those changes to the standards through ordinance number 869, and that ordinance was ultimately appealed to LUBA. LUBA decided to send the ordinance back down to us to make further changes, which is where we are at today with the remand of ordinance number 869 and the habitat assessment guidelines. Since we were last here in October, there's been a LUBA decision in Leahy Estates and another pending enforcement order petition, which I'll talk a bit more about later in the presentation. Next slide. So in 2020, in response to the first enforcement order, staff proposed minor changes to the significant natural resource standards to make them clear and objective, which were later considered by the Planning Commission and adopted by the board. When the ordinance was adopted, the enforcement order was lifted and development could proceed. Next slide. The next year, LUBA sent the ordinance back to the county to make further changes under the following parameters. LUBA decided that the county needed to follow the Goal 5 process outlined in Division 23 of the Oregon Administrative Rules when making changes to the standards that affected a Goal 5 resource. Second, all standards must be clear and objective, including all references to other documents or standards. And the board must make findings that show the county is balancing all of our statewide planning goals. And fourth, there must be an opportunity for public review and comment on these changes. Next slide. With that, during several work sessions last year, the board approved an approximately 18-month process to address the remand following the LUBA decision, looking at updates to the county's wildlife habitat inventory for the urban unincorporated area, starting with Metro's upland wildlife habitat and the county's wildlife habitat mapping. making the standards for natural resources on rural and urban lands clear and objective. And this process will include 2 staff to focus on the work and funding of over $250,000 for consultants to assist us in this process. Next slide. So the board expressed an interest in having the Planning Commission take an active role in the remand process. This will entail briefings throughout the process and work with the consultant team and on public engagement opportunities. The Planning Commission will be holding public hearings and making recommendations to the board on the substance of the ordinance. And then the ordinance will return to the board for hearings and adoption. Next slide. Just today, the ink is dry on the county's contract with MIG APG, formerly known as Angelo Planning Group, the consultant team that will assist us with the inventory, analysis, community engagement, and developing changes to the comprehensive plan policies and natural resource regulations. A first step with the consultant team will be to focus on finalizing our project milestones and timeline and developing a draft public engagement plan. Staff plans updates to the Committee for Community Involvement, CCI S&R subcommittee, and engagement with stakeholders and community throughout the project. So we'll be back in February or March with more information on all these items. Next slide. Last fall, a resident filed a petition to the Land Conservation and Development Commission requesting an enforcement order against the county, claiming that because the county wasn't able to enforce their S&R standards, we were not compliant with our Goal 5 program. The petitioner requested that the new S&R standards be adopted and that the county should not accept development applications on sites with S&Rs until those standards could be adopted by the board. LCDC decided that there was good cause for a hearing on this issue, and they appointed a hearings officer to conduct a hearing, which is scheduled for February 15th. They will take testimony and make a recommendation to LCDC, and LCDC will make the final decision at their April 19th to 21st meeting. Next slide. In July, the county hearings officer approved a 15-lot subdivision known as Leahy Estates on an 8-acre site in Cedar Mill with mapped significant natural resources. This approval includes 1.5 acres of habitat protection, restoration, and new plantings, excuse me. The hearings officer decision was then appealed to LUBA. LUBA agreed with the hearings officer and affirmed the decision, finding that the applicant could follow the earlier version of the county's S&R standards and agreed with the hearings officer's conclusion that the county's code standards had been met. Next slide. While we begin our work anew on the S&R standards, the changes that were adopted through engrossed ordinance number 869 are not in effect. We're advising applicants that because the rules are in flux, there are risks in moving forward. If an applicant decides to move forward, they're advised that the county's natural resource rules, those electing to move forward are asked to use the Leahy Estates decision as a guide and apply the earlier version of the county's S&R standards and address the Goal 5 directly in their applications. Applicants are also advised that an enforcement order proceeding is underway and it could affect their project. Staff will be back to
I'm sorry, Ms. Miller, I have a question. This is Commissioner Petrillo.
Sure.
Who was the appellant in the case with Cedar Mill?
The Leahy Estates, Delmonico, I forgot Ms. Delmonico as a representative of the Tree Keepers of Washington County, I believe.
Okay, thank you.
But I'm sorry, I forget her first name. I don't have
No,
it
that's
handy.
all right. That helps actually fill in the blank there. And thank you for your earlier comments. Yeah.
So we'll be back in February or March with further information on the work of our consultant team, Planning Commission's role, timeline, and approach to public engagement. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions that you may have for me.
Commissioners, I see Commissioner Wellner has his hand up.
I have a couple of questions. First, how do we think we stand relative to the second enforcement order compared to where we were at with the last enforcement order?
Well, I think we
I
should
think I
direct
would
that
turn
to
that over
council. Yeah.
to Rob.
Sure.
May have a better handle on that information.
I'll take that one. So I handled the Joanne Delmonico case, and I'm handling now the LCDC case. We have testimony due on the 8th. There's no intervening parties. It's just the two parties now. And then we'll have the hearing, as Michelle mentioned, on the 15th. How do I feel about the case as compared to 2 years ago with our enforcement order? I feel a lot better. We have a plan. We are carrying out essentially what LUBA has told us to do. There are 4 issues in what I'm calling Warren 4, which is LCDC case. I'd almost prefer not to get into the details of that because we're litigating it right now, and to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if this gets appealed, no matter how it comes out. But for a number of reasons I can get into very loosely if you'd like to. I feel a lot better about this case than I felt about the case that we litigated in 2020.
Okay. And I don't need to get into the details. Yeah. Relative to the next level of work, our last round of work focused primarily on the uplands, and we deferred to Clean Water Services for the wetlands and waterways. Is this next round going to focus on that as well, do we think?
Well,
I'm not exactly, can you maybe explain a little bit more? So Clearwater Services and their requirements were a part of the LUBA case that we just finished litigating. Is that what you're alluding to?
So the challenges that we had with 422 were the protections to upland habitat.
Right.
Not necessarily wetlands and waterways, because those already fall under clean water standards.
Right. I see what you're asking.
I didn't read the legal challenge, but I'm assuming Clean Water's rules are clear and objective enough to to not be called into question?
Well, we litigated that specific issue, and LUBA rejected that specific argument. But what that case really involved was the upper. I don't want to use Michelle's words. What's their preferred choice of words for we describe what we were fighting over in Delmonico? I don't want to use the wrong words, but it's the upper wildlife habitat.
Upland habitat.
Upland habitat.
Green areas.
Upland.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we're fighting over at LCDC primarily.
Our focus and our charge from the board was to take a look at our upland wildlife habitat and our wildlife habitat through the inventory process. So we'll be looking at that and then following the steps of Goal 5, which involves the ESEE analysis to kind of look at the conflicting uses and coming up with the desired level of protection, so to speak, for wildlife habitat. With respect to the water-related resources, we have a firm foundation, I think you're alluding to, with the Clean Water Services requirements, and that's outlined through the Tualatin Basin Program. And I think we've heard that the board is supportive of that, of that program and following those guidelines. But we're going to be following the process as that leads it. So nothing is necessarily decided at this point. It's likely to be compatible and consistent with existing regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Commissioner Petrillo.
Thank you, Chair. Goal 5 is a difficult issue. I mean, it's a difficult set of rules and concepts. It's just it's not clear and it can be fuzzy to deal with. And my sense is, this being my last planning commission meeting, I think you just have to keep in mind that this is going to be in the forefront of your work, or it's going to be part of your work for the next decade. Oregon land use, really, I think, when it was born or originated was about farmland preservation, really. And being a timber state or a resource state, some of what's discussed in Goal 5 was lower on priorities. And I think we're entering an era where that's shifted. And for Washington County specifically, I would say there's been, false starts with getting a tree ordinance and a lot of discussion. And there's people, many of who it sounds like are the activists and appellants on some of these cases, who want to see more tree protection in the unincorporated areas of Washington County. So I have a feeling that's what's going to be coming down the pike sometime, and maybe it will require a political shift, but I think that's something to be just, in the forefront of, planning, is that eventually that is going to be a factor to deal with, and the county and the elected officials will have to decide if they want to take a position on that and support or not.
Commissioner Bertillo, just to be sure, you mean a tree ordinance?
Yes, a tree protection ordinance, yes.
Any other comments?
I'm sorry, just for the record, for anyone else who's listening, there is no tree protection ordinance in place for unincorporated Washington County.
Thank you for reminding us of that. Any other comments? Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. The next item on the agenda is a quasi-judicial plan amendment training.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners. I'm Brian Robb, Associate Planner with the Community Planning Group, and I'll be giving a brief overview of plan amendments. So community planning is currently processing a plan amendment application, which is a type 3 hearing process scheduled to come before you next month. And since we haven't had a quasi-judicial plan amendment in quite some time, I think the last one was in 2019, we figured we would come to you and give you a little bit of an overview of that process and what your role in that it will be. Over the next few slides, I'll discuss what plan amendments are and why they're done. I'll go over 2 different types of plan amendments and how they differ from one another, as well as their approval criteria. And finally, I'll provide just some basic background information on the plan amendment that's scheduled for next month. And once I've wrapped up with this information, then Rob will provide some due process in land use matters, some information on due process. So plan amendment basics. Plan amendments are any text or map changes to state acknowledged comprehensive plans. So in our case, that's the 1983 County Comprehensive Plan. And these amendments can affect any element of the comprehensive plan, including the comprehensive framework plan for the urban area, the rural natural resource plan, community plans, et cetera. So plan amendments can reflect changes to state law, board policy changes, or update old, outdated land use or policies. And they can also respond to an applicant's request to change a land use designation. So on the following slide, I'll touch on the 2 different types of plan amendments. So I'm going to introduce you to the two different types of plan amendments, and later we'll hear from County Council to go over those in a little more detail. But legislative plan amendments may affect numerous properties where owners are not necessarily property owners are not applicants, but like all properties in a particular land use district may be affected countywide. We see this type of plan amendment more often because they're usually initiated by the county and approved through an ordinance. Recently, you've heard proposed plan amendments of the legislative type, including those for middle housing and minor amendments. And the decision maker is the board with recommendation from the PC. Now, quasi-judicial plan amendments affect a more limited number of properties and are typically a change to a land use designation initiated by a property owner. So when a change is requested to a resource land, such as exclusive forest use or exclusive forest conservation, or AF20, the PC makes a recommendation to the board, and the board is ultimately the decision maker. Or for any urban plan amendments or plan amendments for non-resource land, the PC is actually the decision-making body for those plan amendments. It didn't go forward. There we go. So in terms of plan amendment approval for quasi-judicial plan amendments, the applicant must demonstrate evidence that the proposed change follows various state, regional, and local rules. And these include the statewide planning goals, the transportation planning rule, the Metro Urban Growth Management Functional Plan, and the various elements of the county comprehensive plan. So the applicability of these vary depending on the nature of the proposed change and whether it's urban or rural. So staff reviews the application for compliance with these, writes a staff report with findings, and then provides that staff report to the PC. And when necessary, we present to the board as well. So the upcoming hearing is a proposed amendment for a site at on Northwest McDaniel Road, just east of Northwest 119th, immediately across the street from Bonnie Slope Elementary School. And the current designation is neighborhood commercial, and it currently contains one house, and it's been that land use since the initial adoption of the comprehensive plan in 1983, and no changes have occurred to that property since. The proposed change would be to R9, residential up to 9 units per acre under the traditional standard housing scheme. And the decision maker will be the Planning Commission on this. And that hearing is scheduled for February 15th. And a staff report will be provided to you 1 week prior to that. And I'm going to hand it over to Rob to talk about due process. Just let me know when you need to change the slide.
Sure. Okay, so, all right, so I'm going to take you all up to maybe 50,000 feet and just talk about the difference between legislative hearings and quasi-judicial hearings, because it's important for you to know your roles and what you have to do differently when you're sitting with either a quasi-judicial hat on or a legislative hat on, because it's pretty substantial in terms of the difference. There are 3 key factors for distinguishing one from the other, as I've shown on this slide. And these are the 3 factors explained by the Oregon Supreme Court way back in 1979. There's been a ton of cases since then, but it all boils down to looking at these 3 factors and deciding which you are, either a legislative or a quasi-judicial case. So if you go to the next slide, these are kind of in a different order than I thought they would be, so I'm going to have to gather my thoughts here. So a legislative process, and if you would think this way, when you're conducting a legislative hearing, you're really sitting as a policymaker. Think of yourself almost as a legislator. You're making recommendations or adopting new rules. In this case, you're really adopting local laws, what we call ordinances. And so the process that we focus in is basic due process, which means that the public needs an opportunity to be heard. And that's why the chair will always ask for public input at public hearings when we conduct hearings on ordinances, for example. So there's an opportunity for the public to participate and to observe your deliberations and your conversations about this policy-making decision. And then there's also appeal rights that folks have. So it's basic legislative due process. Transparency is really what the core of it is. If you go to the next slide. On quasi-judicial processes, it's a higher level of due process protection. And think about it this way. If you think about your hat as a quasi-judicial body, it's not like you're a legislator. It's more like you're a judge or a jury. And if you think about it that way, the rest of what I'm going to say actually flows and makes sense, because as Brian explained, you're really dealing with a smaller number of properties or a smaller group of people. You're not enacting policy that applies to thousands and thousands. You're really talking about a policy that applies to a handful of properties or a handful of people. So the due process expectation of the courts is higher, and I've quoted the case here where it all stems from, and there's a litany of cases that follow Fasano. But if you think about those due process protections, they're really closer to a judicial proceeding. The kinds of rules that a judge would have to comply with to ensure basic fairness that due process requires. Most of those elements have now been codified in various forms, and I won't get into all those details, but if you go to the next slide, Brian, these are the key things that I really want to point out to you for quasi-judicial hearings, because they are fundamentally different. Most everything you've done since I've been with you over the last year, in fact, everything you've done, has been a legislative hearing. Now we're talking about quasi-judicial hearings, and so we're talking about a smaller set of folks, a smaller set of properties. So it is vital that we have adequate notice and an opportunity to be heard, and an opportunity for an evidentiary hearing for all sides. They have to be able to come in front of you like litigants would come in front of a court and present the evidence and witnesses and testimony that they want you to take into consideration when you decide what is essentially a case. And if you think about it that way, it's a clean way of thinking about it, I believe. The key elements that the Fasano court pointed out, and we still live with today because they're vital, are creating an impartial tribunal. So we don't allow judges to do certain things that we allow legislators to do. Judges aren't supposed to talk to parties unless everyone's present and it's on the record. We call it ex parte if you don't comply with that, and very narrow circumstances where ex parte contacts can happen, but mostly litigants or lawyers for litigants can't talk to a judge unless the other side is there too. And everybody listens and it's on the record. Conflicts of interest are codified in our state law, generally don't create much of an issue for most of you, except on occasions I've seen actually a couple of you declare potential conflicts of interest when we do a legislative amendment. It becomes more critical when we're in quasi-judicial situation. And conflicts of interest are either actual or potential. An actual conflict of interest means your decision in this case could have financial benefit or avoidance of financial detriment to you or your family. It's really personal. And so the law requires, and Oregon has long required, that if you have a potential conflict of interest, you think it might benefit you or your family potentially, you're required to declare that conflict of interest on the record. You can recuse yourself if you want to, but you're not required to. If you have an actual conflict of interest, which means that your decision in this matter will affect you financially, you're not only required to disclose it, but then you're required to recuse yourself from deciding. And that's the same standard we apply to judges. Judges aren't supposed to hear cases where they could get a financial benefit or a financial detriment based on the decision they make. The third thing is it's absolutely vital that we deal with in quasi-judicial hearings is prejudgment bias. In other words, do you know any of the key litigants or key witnesses And do you have something either against them or in favor of them? Which is why we don't generally have judges deciding cases involving family members, relatives, or their neighbors. We pull them off of those cases. So prejudgment bias is important to not only disclose, but then to take appropriate action to remedy, to ensure that the litigants, and look at it that way, the litigants coming before you receive a fair and impartial hearing in front of a fair and impartial panel. So those are the key elements of what FSANA requires. And then, of course, we have to make a record of the proceedings. And also, in order to satisfy due process in a land use context, we have to make adequate findings. We can't just say we're deciding it, you win, you lose. We've got to explain our logic, our reasoning, and put it in writing, which then makes it easier to appeal and sustain or reverse depending. So the logic and the foundation for the decision-making is on the record. So that's all quasi-judicial. Everything I've just said really doesn't apply in most cases to all your legislative decisions, but when we get quasi-judicial matters, think about it like a court case instead of hearing on a bill. Hearing on a case versus hearing on a bill. And if you can absorb that, I think you'll be able to intellectually understand it from a 50,000-foot perspective and apply it at a 10,000-foot level like Brian's explained. So that's my best kind of summation of quasi-judicial decision-making versus legislative decision-making. Happy to answer any questions. Unless there's another slide. Is there another slide? Didn't think so. Got it.
Yes, I have a comment and a question. Well, bias is, I think it's important for people to understand because I was one time accused of bias on a case, and it really wasn't, I had a personal, I didn't prejudge the case. It was something we had heard multiple times, and I had settled on what my decision or vote would be on it, and but I was pretty adamant about it, and it was really more of a First Amendment issue versus a 14th Amendment issue, and I think just important for people to realize that the idea is, though, it's not just whether you know the people or you have personal bias against them, it's whether you have a personal bias against what they're proposing, and you're not open or perceived to be open to objective consideration of what they're asking, going back to the 14th Amendment issue, which is really kind of what this is talking about. It's a fine line because maybe it's that you feel strongly it's in the public interest that you do oppose the applicant, and it's not biased. But so it's a fuzzy area, and I think the other important thing is ex parte. Disclosures, if you do have the ex parte, it's not the ex parte is not allowed, right? It's that if you have the ex parte, you then have to go on record that the ex parte conversation occurred, and then of course that opens up whether the person wants more evidentiary type of appeal or information from that. So
I would agree with all of that. I would just note that the ex parte thing in your last comment, it really kind of depends upon the circumstances. Some ex parte contacts are, how should we say, okay or correctable if you place them on the record and afford people an opportunity to rebut it or whatever that bias or potential perception might be. Some types of ex parte contacts really go beyond that, however. We try to avoid those as much as possible, which is why I would always advise you, if you have a quasi-judicial matter coming before you, to not only disclose ex parte contacts, but avoid them. And also avoid doing the things that we generally don't want trial judges doing or juries doing unless everybody's there. Doing your own independent investigation, for example. Generally not a good idea in a quasi-judicial hearing, but if you want to do research in a legislative matter, that's a whole different thing. Legislators, well, I wish many of them did a lot more research, but a lot of them do a lot of research, and that's okay. In fact, we want policymakers to do research, but When we have judges doing research on specific cases, that's where we get into the ex parte, the conflict of interest, and all of those challenges.
Could you talk a little bit more about research? Because what does that entail? I mean, if a commissioner wanted to go out and look at that property, is that considered research?
So if we're talking in a legislative context, my concerns are very low because you're just educating yourself about the underlying policy decision to be made. When it comes to a quasi-judicial hearing, if you're going to educate yourself about, say, the property or do a site visit, it's best not to do that independently. If you believe that's important for the Planning Commission to go visit the property, that can be arranged. We call it in trial law, we call that a trial visit, where I've actually walked on property with a judge. And I actually climbed a mountain with a judge, but the whole other story. But for a case. But you want to do that with all the parties on notice and the ability to be present. And then also the ability to rebut anything you might have seen as part of the evidentiary hearing. So we build in a lot of due process in order to obtain that. And that's what you would expect from a judge.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Wellner.
I believe Commissioner Podar's got a
Oh,
question.
thank you for pointing that out. Please, Commissioner Podar.
Thank you, Chair Lockwood. I have some concerns, Brian. So one, I think what the county and everybody fails to understand is that we are volunteers. We are literally asking, if we are talking about equity, community members are volunteering their time to serve on the Land Use Planning Commission. A lot of us have had zero experience with working in land use decision making, with working with lawmaking, policy making. So when we talk about equity, are we now so we are saying that we need people who are experts. We are volunteers. We are not getting paid for our time. And we are supposed to represent 700,000 people. When we are trying to represent 700,000 people with very little experience, how are we supposed to know about our community if we are not stepping out into the community and getting to know their needs? Human bias is natural. We are going to have biases, and unless we know our community more, the larger community, we are going to stay with our biases, which is going to impact decision making no matter what we say or do. So in fact, I was anyway going to propose that it is high time that the Planning Commission starts getting a stipend for all of this labor, expert labor that we are putting in. So I don't know how to introduce that. I was going to introduce that later at some point of time. But when we talk about quasi-judicial and legislative, I think what we're failing at is understanding is the equity bit of it. Are we expecting all 9 of our commissioners to have that experience? So now we have expert commissioners on the panel. Are we spending time and money on our commissioners to be aware of their internal biases, their cultural circumstances, their upbringing, their own, internal, mindsets? Are we investing in our commissioners to learn and educate themselves about all of the racist practices in our country, all of the other circumstances of our community members, diverse community members, and how all of them play? We are not investing in our commissioners at all. So when we are expecting our commissioners to, we are literally, I don't know about others, but I know that for a lot of times I've had to step out on my own time and learn about what land use means to people. How do they connect with the land? What do they call home? What do they even understand about land use? When I go to places and say I'm the planning commissioner, and they're like, what does that mean? I'm a land use commissioner. What does that mean? So how are we expecting commissioners to understand the difference and to actually make unbiased judgments without even knowing a community? And we don't. How many of us know about cross-cultural circumstances of our community members? How many people, how many developers know anything about how people connect to the land in, say, India or in Pakistan or in Sri Lanka, or people who have, have had to escape from Afghanistan, or people who are refugees, asylees? We have no idea about anything. So no matter what when we talk about bias, we have bias based on our upbringing and our circumstances and where we have, what we're surrounded by. There has been no investment done into commissioners, into land use planning board to educate us more about the larger community so that we can make unbiased judgments and decisions. I hope I'm trying to make this clear. Please ask me questions about it. And I think it's time. I'm really glad we're talking about this today, because we have to make sure that equity is not the lens that we are talking about, but it's a framework. And in that framework, we must ensure people have all the tools as much as possible and awareness about the larger community to make good decisions. And I hope that helps. But I'm a little unclear about how this is happening right now.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Wellner.
I'm shifting gears a little bit from Commissioner Podar, but the Briggs Road Plan Amendment that we saw on the slide here a minute ago, I remember those conversations, and part of the conversation was the process that it took to bring that request to the table. I mean, it was less than an acre or something like that, if I remember correctly, and it cost $20,000 to $30,000 in fees for them to bring it here, and they had to wait to get on a work program, and it was onerous. And I think during those deliberations, we talked about the potential for an expedited plan amendment process, something that was still an investment, but not as challenging. And I don't know where that went. I didn't go anywhere because we were busy working on other stuff. But it would be great to revisit. For the benefit of the planning commissioners, cities do plan amendments a lot more often than the county does. And we see so few of them because that process is so difficult. There are opportunities where there could be more. But again, it's expensive. And I mean, the little piece that we just saw that's coming before you on the 15th, they probably spent $20,000 in fees for what may be an 8-lot subdivision or something is my guess. So, my 2 cents.
Are the fees for the process, the plan amendment process?
They're very expensive.
That's what you mean by, yeah, okay.
So, I mean, as far as it's very expensive, and you have to get on, this staff know, but 2 staffs before now, 20 years ago, they looked at the community plan maps as the gospel, and they weren't gonna change, and we're not gonna do anything to pursue people's quasi-judicial plan amendment requests. That's evolved over time. That evolution may change a little bit with middle housing. You may not need to do plan amendments as often, in cities in particular, but it's still something that we should think about because it's a big deal to, you know how much work we've put into work programs in years past?
Yeah.
Just getting onto the work program is what you used to have to do in order to do a plan amendment. I think you still have to do a plan amendment. You don't?
No, I think the process is more simple than it was in the past. So we do ask people usually to do a pre-application conference, but then we have an application process and they're able to apply. We work with them on the materials they need to submit and the fees and all of that. But we used to have actually 2 time periods because we had an ordinance season, so we kind of told them try to do it sort of between those times. Since we don't have an ordinance season anymore, we don't really say that. So I think it is easier now to get something considered than it was in the past. And I know Brian had taken a look at a recent plan amendment from Beaverton, I believe, and just kind of said, this looks simpler than what we do. So I think there is an opportunity for us to learn from what other jurisdictions do, and possibly streamline the process. But that hasn't been something that we've focused on in the last couple of years. We haven't really had applications in the last couple of years.
I think Ms. Kelly wants to come in. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to go a bit further and say that we did simplify the process significantly. We also did compare our what we end up charging to the rates of other cities and counties regionally here. Ours are less than many similar local jurisdictions, but we don't charge a flat fee as others often do. We have a resolution and order that basically forbids us from subsidizing these applications in any way. And that means that everyone who touches a plan amendment application per the resolution and order, all materials we use are supposed to be billed to the applicant. So Brian might write a report, the supervisor reviews it, the administrative staff is working on notices and copying. All of that, all mailings have to be billed directly to the applicant. So we have worked to reduce duplication, in a major way. We have set up the application so that all of the similar requirements at the state, regional, and county level are grouped. The applicant can address those in a grouped manner, and we provide our findings in a grouped manner. It shortens the application and simplifies understanding of the concepts. And we also have looked to establish a base rate for these, but it hasn't gone up the ladder successfully. I will say that when a city does a plan amendment, it is easier because they're usually just changing a zone on a map, not the underlying comprehensive plan designation for an area. We don't have zones, we have a one map system. So we are changing our comprehensive plan every time. We don't have like an overlay of zones. And I won't get into it deeply, but it's easier to change just a zone than it is, for example, the larger residential designation of an area. But we certainly, we can look to simplify the application process further.
Well, and it may be less necessary again with middle housing.
Right.
But
definitely.
It's telling that the last one we saw was 3 years, going on 4 years ago. So there must be something, either the memory runs long and people just know you don't do comp plan amendments in Washington County, or there's still something there that's a challenge and they choose not to.
Or our land use designations are still perfect, yes.
Commissioner Petrillo?
I'm going to move back to the bigger issue, the broader issue of judicial and our legislative quasi-judicial. When I first started, it was a new concept, and just responding, I think I'm responding to Commissioner Podar's comments, and I think you should be relieved that we deal with quasi-judicial very infrequent, if not it's rare. And I don't even remember the 2019, but there was others in 14. And so, but when it does occur, it's an odd duck. And I just want to responding to or helping people with the context of it, it's completely different than what we usually do. And it is a judicial role, like a judge, which to some degree, the average planning commissioner or citizen on a planning commission is not well equipped to do or trained to do. In fact, other jurisdictions don't have the planning commission doing quasi-judicial. It's not required. It's the elected officials can do it within their own body. If not, I think it can be delegated to a hearings officer as well. So, which is a person trained in all of these rules of procedure, really, almost. So it's easy for us. The idea is council and staff should, that when we have quasi-judicials, they create guardrails so that we don't accidentally create a problem. And essentially, everything that Commissioner Podar is interested in is fair game for legislative. That's the public forum. It's an issue that's dealing with that's going to affect the public at large. The difference is, and I think it helps to provide context, is that when someone's like coming before us with a quasi-judicial, the word is just odd wording, but is they're wanting to do something to their property and ask for a change. It's like a person coming before the court saying, I want a hearing on this, and we have to basically safeguard their constitutional rights and economic interests in a way that is completely different from the other work we do. And so we have to sort of be on our best behavior so we don't create a lawsuit because we fail the rules of procedure and end up there's being an appeal or a lawsuit.
And if I could just add that part of doing this is to help with that training part to kind of make sure that people do have a better understanding. We will put a lot of the sidebars in our staff report. So that will give you more of the parameters of, these are the criteria that we can look at, and this is how this application meets those. So we are trying through this training and through what we'll do at the next hearing to help guide the Planning Commission so you do have a good idea. And then if anyone steps out of line, Rob will let you know and help guide through that as well.
If I could just add, in fact, in my little handy-dandy Planning Commission book, I think I have the opening statement from the last quasi-judicial hearing you conducted in 2019, and this is what council reads at the beginning to kind of guide the folks that are participating into understanding kind of what we've summarized here today and calling for any disclosures of bias, calling for any disclosures of ex parte contacts and those types of things. So we'll walk you through all of that process. Maybe it's even a cleaner way to think of yourselves in that kind of case as jurors. And, we'll try to do our best at giving you the proper jury instructions before you make your decision and walk you through the process to keep the process fair for the litigants.
Why jurors can't read newspapers about the case or news that might affect that. And the idea is that it's fair and independent to the way it would be for any person coming before the law.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
And I want to jump in too and just acknowledge that this is a pretty complicated topic and people may have questions about it. And so I want to encourage you to reach out to staff if something comes up and you're just wondering how this is going to work with an upcoming hearing. Let us know. Rob can answer those questions to make sure that we're navigating anything particularly tricky. And to circle back to Commissioner Podar's comments, it is really important for planning commissioners to know the community and to talk to the community. So when that gets complicated is when there's an actual item that you are deliberating on. So we want you to be out there, we want you to be doing that community work. It's valuable and that's your role here. So we're here to answer any questions to make sure it doesn't cause any problems later on. I also wanted to circle back on the topic of stipends for our boards and commissions. We know we ask for a lot, particularly from this commission, but also from other boards and commissions here at Washington County. There are other agencies that are now providing stipends to more of their volunteer boards. And we understand that is an equity issue for people and their ability to participate. And so that is something that we will take back up to county leadership and continue the conversation about. Sorry about your timing.
Do you have more for us? No.
That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes. And we had two sets of minutes that we were reviewing for today. The first one is November 2nd, 2022. Does any commissioner have corrections to offer for those minutes?
I think my name was misspelled in one spot on page 4 of 8. But with that, I would move to approve.
Okay. Did you see the spot? Or we'll just ask staff to take another, oh, right, it's in the middle of the page, just above, yes. It says Weller instead of Wellner. Okay. Any other corrections? Is there any objection to adopting the minutes for November 2nd, 2022 as corrected? Okay, without objection, the minutes are adopted. The next set is November 16th, 2022. Anybody have a correction to offer on that one? Is there any objection to adopting the minutes as submitted for November 16th? Seeing none, the minutes for November 16th, 2022 are adopted as submitted. And the next item on our agenda is Planning Commission announcements. And I have one. Our next meeting, which will be mid-February, I'm forgetting the exact date. At that meeting, we will have our election of chair and vice chair serving for 2023. I've served as chair for 2 years. I'm willing to continue in the role. But I wanted commissioners to be thinking about that election that's coming up and thinking about what are your preferences as far as chair and vice chair for 2023. And if anyone has questions about that, I'm perfectly happy to talk about it. And I think staff is happy to talk about it and answer any questions too. Vice Chair Dye, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
I appreciate that. I have also served as the vice chair and have appreciated the opportunity to be of service and would continue to do so. Thank you for cutting my mic on. And would continue to do so if the rest of the commission sees fit to put me back there, but otherwise I would certainly step aside to let someone else take that opportunity.
Thank you. And then one more thing I would add is that our new commissioners, this is new to you, you probably don't know us very well. And so new commissioners are, of course, welcome to participate in that discussion and to vote or to abstain as they feel most comfortable. Any other announcements? Commissioner Petillo.
I just wanted to acknowledge of the people in the room, particularly Susan and Kurt, or the support folks in the room. I mean, for 10 years, they've it's been patience and willing to do a lot of retrieve my cell phone when I leave it behind. Sending us the notices, following up, accommodating our needs communication-wise, as Kurt has done multiple times before the advent of Zoom. And So I just want to acknowledge that. And two is, you know, it's been a pleasure and an honor to work with the staff and dedicated staff, helpful staff, really from top to bottom, from the director and even from the prior director's time. Thank you. And I think I speak for Matt when we, as well, that we appreciate the opportunity to serve here.
Any other announcements? Next item is adjournment. Are there any objections to adjourning at this time? Without objection, we are adjourned.